Welcome back. Together we have learned about the defining moments in Prophet Muhammad's life, his birth, upbringing, and mission. Now we come to the last moments of his life and the events that followed his death. Joining me is Dr. Shabir Ally to help us continue the story. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So can you highlight the circumstances under which the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, died?
Yes, the Prophet, peace be upon him, had migrated to Medina, and he was now living in Medina for the last 10 years. In the 10th year, he made what is now described in our sources as the farewell pilgrimage. And in that pilgrimage, he delivered what we call the farewell sermon, giving some of his final instructions to the Muslim community. It was only a few months after that, on his return to the city of Medina, after having completed the pilgrimage, that he now fell into an illness that led to his death.
Can you share a little bit about what this message was in his farewell sermon to the community?
Yes, in that message he highlighted several important points. One is that all of the practices of the previous, what is called the days of ignorance, are now abolished. And that includes things like the charging of interest, where creditors would charge compound interest, and poor people having to take loans because they had no means other than this would be further burdened by the interest that they had to pay on the loans. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, canceled that. He said you're allowed to retain your principal, recover your principal, but no interest. He also canceled what are referred to as blood feuds, where one tribe, somebody from one tribe killed somebody from the other tribe, and the one tribe needs to take revenge, and then revenge is taken for the revenge, and it goes on ad infinitum. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said that all of that is canceled. He also emphasized the importance of prayer and the importance of paying close attention to your servants to make sure that they are well fed and clothed and duly rewarded for their service. He stressed the importance of looking after women in particular, to make sure that their rights are being granted and that they are not being abused or ill-treated.
And the idea with these messages is that they're applied even today. Many Muslims, regard them very highly, right?
Yes. Often what is referred to as the Prophet's last sermon is printed on a sheet of paper and hung on a wall as a constant reminder to Muslims that this is what the Prophet, peace be upon him, taught. Although I should point out that no one book of hadith contains the entire sermon. Bits and pieces have been collated from a variety of books to give us the complete sermon as we have it now. So it's possible that the Prophet, peace be upon him, did not say all of those things all in the one shot as well. It may be that over the period of the pilgrimage, the few days, he said different things at different times, and people remembered this is what he said in the last pilgrimage, and now those are all compiled together to give us what looks to be a continuous and long speech.
So after he passed away, how did this impact the community at the time around him?
The community was largely in shock, and that shock is represented in the behavior of Omar, a close companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him. He is reported to have avowed that the Prophet, peace be upon him, is not dead. He said the Prophet must have gone to meet his Lord in a manner similar to the fact that Moses had gone to meet his Lord, and the Prophet would come back very shortly, and then he would penalize those people who dared to say that the Prophet, peace be upon him, had died. So Omar thought it to be like a sacrilege to say that the Prophet died. But that was not the only reaction. Another sort of reaction, a calm one, is noted in the composure of Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr, another companion of the Prophet, who happened also to be the Prophet's father-in-law, came. He had been out of the town at the time of the Prophet's death, but he heard the news. He came. He went in to see the Prophet as his body lay still. He kissed his forehead, and he came out to address the people. And he said that whoever worshipped Muhammad should know that Muhammad has died, but whoever worshipped God should know that God is ever living and he does not die.
So what happened? So now that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, passed away, obviously he was an instrumental leader within the community. What happened to the Muslim community then? How were the next leaders decided upon?
So while the preparations were still being made for the Prophet, peace be upon him, to be buried, some of the companions of the Prophet had gathered to elect or decide on a leader to carry on the mission of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. There are two aspects of his mission. One is that he was a recipient of divine revelation. The Muslim community generally agrees that that will not continue. But the other aspect of the Prophet's role in the community was as a community leader. He was a governor. And the question then was who would govern the affairs of the city and of the Muslim following more largely. And some of the companions wanted to choose one from among themselves. And these our companions are known as the Ansar, those people who are native to the city of Medina, where the Prophet, peace be upon him, had migrated to. At the same time, some of the migrants who had migrated along with the Prophet, peace be upon him, they are referred to in the Arabic as Muhajirun, they thought that one of them should be selected to be the leader. And eventually, after some discussion, Abu Bakr was championed as one of the migrants, the migrant most fitting to be the leader. And eventually people came to pledge their allegiance to him, which was a rudimentary manner of expressing their vote to be with Abu Bakr.
So then, how did the climate or social and political climate change now that they had new leaders within the community?
Well, now that they had new leaders, obviously they had to live with the memory of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and they had to live under now a new leader. It was difficult for many of them to bear the loss and the absence of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Many remembered his days fondly, some often with tears. And they would eventually think back to the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, his example, how he did things, and try to practice their faith in a manner similar to the way in which the Prophet, peace be upon him, had done it.
Now, looking at the times that we're in today, is there, obviously back then they were, specific community leaders. Can we say that that's the case today as well, in that sense? Or is it more specific to each community now has, imams or community leaders that they look to, and then you look to the broader religion?
It would have been somewhat similar. There were specific locations where prayers were being held. Sometimes the Prophet, peace be upon him, had sent a person to lead people there in prayer. So they had their own local leaders. Those leaders would often refer back to the Prophet, peace be upon him, send delegations to ask questions, to settle issues, to rule over disputes. And now the situation is largely similar in that you have a centralized leader and then many local leaders as well.
So for our viewers, if there is one or two key messages that you would want them and us to take home, looking at the life of the Prophet and his death, what would that be?
Well, the time of his death leaves some lessons for us, and that the Prophet, peace be upon him, is shown in the biographies about him to have been given a choice. One report says that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was given the choice either between either the keys of the treasures of this world or on the other hand, entering paradise. So when he mentioned this to one of his companions, the companion said, Prophet of God, why don't you choose the treasures of this world and then also to enter paradise? But the Prophet, peace be upon him, saw it for himself as a choice between this and that. And he chose to be in the life hereafter, not to live on and to enjoy the pleasures of this world. In fact, one narrative says that he pointed with his finger towards the sky, and he said, Bal ila rafiq al-a'la, to the highest companion. And that expressed his wish to now leave this world and to go and be with God, who is the highest of all companions. His wife Aisha narrated, may God be pleased with her, that when the Prophet said this, she realized that he's not choosing us and he's going to the life hereafter.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.